You.
Tonight, the Knox County Board of Education is expected to debate the costs and benefits of a career magnet academy. That celebrated school is in danger of being closed. The career tech-focused school is the result of a partnership between Knox County Schools, Pellissippi State Community College, and the Chamber of Commerce. The goal is to set students up to enter the workforce as soon as they earn a degree.
But a review by the district shows the school is falling short of its goals. 10 News reporter Shannon Smith joining us tonight from the Board of Education work session, where parents and students hope to convince district leaders to keep that school open. Shannon?
That's exactly what they're trying to do tonight, Robin. It's a pretty packed house in there for it being a, Wednesday night Board of Education meeting. A lot of students from Career Magnet, and they're trying to sway the opinions of the Board of Education to keep their school open. Now, from a memo sent out by the Knox County Board of Education, they cited several reasons why they're looking at making some changes to the Career Magnet program. First being that enrollment is not as high as it should be. They say they have 251 students enrolled when their target was 500. They're also citing pretty high costs. It costs thousands of dollars per student to get those dual enrollment credits with Pellissippi State Community College, and they're saying they're paying Pellissippi about $300,000 a year to rent their facilities. They're also concerned that a lot of the credits the students are getting through that dual enrollment will not be transferred over to four-year universities. Now, students have reached out to us saying that they feel like this is really helping them. They love the school that they go to, and they're hoping that the Board of Education will give them a second chance. So they are going to be looking at 3 different options tonight of how to deal with Career Magnet. The first would be to completely shut down the program. They would send the kids back to their base zoned schools for the fall of 2019 and not accept any more students. The second option is to sunset the program, meaning, we'll just see how kids can finish up, or they'll just completely revamp it. And we'll tell you what the Board of Education decides on tonight, as well as talk with some students that'll be on the night beat tonight at 11. Till then, I'm live downtown. I'll send it back.